Rebecca is the New York Times best-selling author of Trail of Lightning, Storm of Locusts, Black Sun, and Star Wars Resistance Reborn. She has won the Nebula, Hugo, and Locus Awards for her fiction and was the recipient of the 2018 Astounding, formerly Campbell Award for Best New Writer. The next book in her Between Earth and Sky series, Fevered Star, is due out in March of 2022. She lives in New Mexico with her family. We're going to be discussing mostly Black Sun. Black Sun is from the New York Times bestselling author of Star Wars Resistance Reborn, brings the engrossing and vibrant, as said by Tochi Onyebuchi, author of Riot Baby. It's the first book in the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, inspired by the civilization of the Pre-Columbian Americas and woven into a tale of celestial prophecies, political intrigue, and forbidden magic. A god will return when the earth and sky converge under the black sun. In the holy city of Tova, the winter solstice is usually a time for celebration and renewal, but this year it coincides with a solar eclipse, a rare celestial event prescribed by the sun priest as an unbalancing of the world. Meanwhile, a ship launches from a distant city bound for Tova and set to arrive on the solstice. The captain of the ship, Shiala, is a disgraced teak whose song can calm the waters around her as easily as it can warp a man's mind. Her ship carries one passenger, described as harmless. The passenger, Serapio, is a young man, blind, scarred, and cloaked in destiny. As Shiala well knows, when a man is described as harmless, he usually ends up being a villain. Crafted with unforgettable characters, Rebecca Roanhorse has created a brilliant world that shows the full panoply of human grace and depravity, said Ken Liu, award-winning author of The Grace of Kings. This epic adventure explores the decadence of power amidst the weight of history and the struggle of individuals swimming against the confines of society and their broken pasts in this absolutely tremendous, as said by S.A. Chakraborty, author of The City of Brass, and most original series debut of the decade. Welcome, Rebecca.
No pressure.
Well, thank you for joining us here. How are you this evening?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for asking. Happy to be here.
We're really glad to have you here, and collected some questions to sort of get to know you in your writing process. So one of the first questions that was asked is what kind of schedule you keep and what your writing process is.
Yeah. Well, it really depends. I also write for TV. So actually right now I'm in a writer's room, which meets on Zoom. So I don't actually have to be in Los Angeles to write. So right now my writing process is get up and be in the writer's room for 5 to 6 hours a day, and then work on my novels and short stories and basically all my prose work at night. I'm also in the midst of writing a comic book for Marvel, so I have to fit that in there as well.
Oh my goodness, you have a lot
Yeah.
of things going.
I do. And so I think what that means is I really learned not to be too precious about my writing. I have a daughter who plays soccer, so I do a lot of my writing sitting in the car at the soccer field. Back when we used to travel, I used to do a lot of writing in the airports. Wherever I can fit it in is when I do it and where I do it. As long as I have coffee and like a good set of headphones, I'll be okay.
Do you write with like computer or a tablet or pen and paper?
I use mostly a computer. I do keep notebooks. So every novel I start has its own notebook. And I'll take notes there, different ideas that come to mind. I also keep them on my phone. So if I'm lying in bed and something pops into my head, sometimes there's terrible ideas, like when you're sort of like half awake, half asleep. But sometimes they're good. But either way, I put them in the phone. But I do my primary writing in Scrivener, which is software on my laptop. And it really allows me to outline and to create the structure of the novel. And that's really sort of the most important part to get me started and to keep me on track. So that's probably where like 75% of my writing happens.
Cool. So that is where you would put your like story outline and your characters. Um, what has inspired your very different storylines and characters?
Oh gosh, I think I'm inspired by pretty much everything from like a contemporary story in the news to traditional stories or mythologies. Primarily because I love fantasy so much. I draw from a lot of different traditional stories, folklore, mythologies, but I always try to bring something different to them, like a modern interpretation or a post-apocalyptic world, or even an epic fantasy world. Um, so that it's not, just sort of a straight one-to-one. I'm trying to do something different and trying to make a story that is both very specific, but also feels timeless.
I can see that. I have read both the physical copy of Black Sun and listened to the audiobook.
Oh, nice.
Is there something that you hope readers come away from your stories with, like ideas or feelings?
Oh gosh. I think I write stories primarily for the characters. I think I consider my stories very character driven. Although the plot, I think, in Black Sun can feel pretty intricate, what keeps it all together and what makes it feel still intimate, at least I hope, is the characters. And so I want people to come away feeling like they have spent time not only in this world, that may be very different from their day-to-day world, but also with people, with real people, with wants and needs and failures and successes and love and all of the stuff that sort of makes us human. Hopefully, that's what I'm able to accomplish. If I maybe teach you a little history that you might not know along the way, or if I pique your interest in a culture you might not be familiar with, all the better. But
Yeah.
really, as a storyteller, what I want to do is create great characters and hope people love them as much as I grow to love them as I'm writing my stories.
Well, as I read Black Sun, I felt sort of protective of the characters. All of them had been like rejected by people who should have taken care of them.
Mhm.
I was like, oh, these children, a
Yeah.
mother or grandmother sending their daughter away, a father rejecting his son, um, just a whole cultural group rejecting their daughter. It is very emotional, and I saw those characters. So you got me.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah. Um, so that being said, what's the difference between how your stories would be read by an audience that has the cultural understanding of that sort of Native American experience and how an audience with a non-Indigenous experience might read them?
Yeah, I think hopefully my stories work on different levels. I always feel like, first and foremost, it needs to be a good, entertaining story. I'm a storyteller. And so if you read Black Sun and you're just like, Shiala and Srapio, I ship that. Narampa, betrayal, what's going on? That is good enough for me. But of course, there are other layers. And whatever you bring to that, if you bring cultural understanding, then there may be deeper things at play. There may be generational trauma, that's talking to you. There may be conflicts between sort of the way one reads history, depending on which side of history, you feel like you're
Yeah.
on. And then for something like Trail of Lightning, there's just a ton of Easter eggs for like Navajo readers. But nothing, hopefully, that keeps people from accessing the larger story. Because like I said before, it's really about people, and humans, we sort of all are the same. We have the same sort of wants and needs and desires. And that's what sort of makes us human. So certainly there are different layers, but you can really meet the story wherever you're at, and hopefully you'll enjoy it.
If your book Black Sun could reach an unreached audience, who would you wish reads it?
Oh gosh, I was really, I saw this question and I was really trying to think about it, because I think I've reached a lot of the audience that would normally read me.
Yeah.
But, part of me would be very curious for maybe some of the folks who are reading, who think that, oh, Tolkien is sort of the pinnacle of epic fantasy. And then maybe you have George Martin, or maybe you have Sanderson. But I can't imagine that like a Black and Native woman could write epic fantasy that I would enjoy. I would love for those people to just take a chance, and read Black Sun and maybe expand their understanding of what epic fantasy is, that it doesn't have to take place in sort of a pseudo-medieval Europe, that the Americas offer this sort of rich backdrop for the majesty and the grandeur of epic fantasy, for the magic, all of those things that you love. You love dragons, but here I have giant crows and water striders, like all of those elements that make me love epic fantasy too, because first and foremost, I am a reader. And a big nerd when it comes to epic fantasy. So I would love for some of those folks that maybe would think, oh, this isn't the, a kind of book I would give a chance to take a chance. And I think also, now that I'm thinking about it, for people maybe who have never read epic fantasy and only think of it in that one way, like as Lord of the Rings or as Game of Thrones, and maybe just sort of dismiss it outright as fantasy. And can't see that maybe there's more going on in a story, that we're really talking about human stories and history and all of those sorts of things. So maybe take a chance, read a fantasy book, see what you think.
Oh, for sure. And this is definitely epic in scope. Yeah. At the beginning, right away, the opening scene had some graphic abuse and violence, but it's fundamental to the storyline. How did you decide to incorporate those scenes into the story, and what sort of inspired or influenced those storylines?
It's funny because I didn't think of it as very graphic. I really tried to hold back and just put in enough in the story that was relevant. So maybe it's just that there's nothing that is hopefully kind of over the top. Anytime I'm using violence, I'm trying to use it for a reason, not just, gratuitously. So
I don't think it was gratuitous.
Oh, good. Well, everybody, everybody's a little different. But yeah, that opening chapter, I don't want to give anything away in case people haven't read it. But it's really about parents and mothers and their children, and what mothers often do to their children, both physically but metaphorically as well. So when the character Serapio, who's a child in the first one, when he suffers the abuse he does at the hands of his mother, but can't really distinguish what is abuse and what is love at that point, because I think that that's very true to sort of your experience of like when you're a child. Any kind of attention or, feels like love at first. And so he really struggles with that, I think, for the entire book, I don't think he quite ever realizes, sort of what he's been put through. That was really important to me to sort of do that. And well, I'll just say, because I don't think this is giving too much away, but his mother blinds him
Yeah.
in order to turn him into a god. But I've always thought that that blinding was not just literal, but metaphorical as well, because he's cut off from his culture, he's cut off from his people, and then he's sort of sent out in the world to be something that he's not sure. Well, he's convinced he can be, but the rest of us aren't so sure. At least I'm not.
Right.
So with limited resources, let me put it that way. So I think that that is sort of the metaphor for me, for parents and children often. When your parents have their own agenda, or maybe they're not so great, or like all sorts of other sort of issues that are all wound up in his story.
Yeah.
So that's why that happens, but it's definitely for a reason.
Well, and it is the way to access that imagery that you used, where he's using other ways to see.
Yeah, which I definitely think is important as well.
Yeah. So during the novel Black Sun, there were different times and places. How did you keep that continuity in your mind while you were writing it? Were you like writing in a linear thing, or going to the 20 days to convergence back to 16 years, telling the history of the characters? Did it require extra focus for you?
I don't know what normal focus is, so I'm just gonna go with the normal amount of focus. But I did have software to help. The one I mentioned before, Scrivener, really helps you lay out your timeline as well on like little electronic note cards. And so they definitely helped me keep track. I moved a lot of them around. I actually wrote the linear story first, like separately Serapio and Shiala's story, and then separately Narampa's story, and then went back and layered in the flashbacks. So Serapio's childhood. That actually came later. And then probably the last third of the book, when all the sort of disparate threads and people start to converge in Tova and things start to come together, and you see how all these patterns have been laid out. That I wrote all at the same time. So I could, make sure that I caught that momentum and that feel. And so, you knew you were building up to something, some sort of cataclysm at the end. So hopefully that worked.
Well, I read some of the commentary about the cultural myths and histories you used for the series. So what would you like the new readers to learn from the world building?
Oh gosh, so in the back of the book, in the acknowledgments,
Yeah.
I did include sort of a reading list of pre-Columbian resources and Crow resources, because of course, the mythology that I created for the book is based on crows. So I learned a lot about crows and what complex beings they are, and how they hold grudges, and they never forget a face, and they pass that information down to their children. And so when I came to create a culture that was based around vengeance, a god of vengeance, that was like the perfect fit. I thought, well, crows, because they never forget when you've done them wrong. So
Yes.
that came from that. And then I also include a lot of stuff, like I said, about pre-Columbian civilizations, about the Maya, the ancestral Puebloans, Cahokia, of the Mississippi Mound Builders, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of the history of the Americas before conquest. And we sort of labor under this idea that a lot of the original inhabitants of this country were quote unquote savage. And it's just not true.
Right.
They were sophisticated cultures with wonderful city planning and architecture and astronomy and all of these, and like sewer systems and education and all of this very, very cool stuff that sort of gets lost, I think, when we talk about history. And so I really wanted to highlight that. And my book's not a history book.
Yeah.
Like I said, I take a lot of liberties. I do a lot
Right.
of mixing. It's definitely a fantasy book.
Oh, yeah.
But if it interests you, if it piques your interest about those cultures, for example, Cahokia, I do give you some resources so you can go find out more.
Absolutely. Well, you piqued my interest.
Oh,
Thank you.
good. Good.
One of the things that I enjoyed in the story was how you just deconstructed the Western gender and sexuality rules.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share your experience about writing about these diverse characters, whether intersex, transgender, non-binary? What considerations influence the development of the sexual relationships and gender identities?
Yeah. So my understanding of a lot of traditional indigenous cultures is that there was no strict gender binary. And that was something that was introduced by Western conquest. So I wanted to capture some of that. So for me, creating this world was not just like, oh, let's pull a few facts and then like, sort of slap some brown paint on it and we'll say it's kind of native. I wanted to capture the worldview, like some of the worldview and the way of thinking. So it was important for me to include these different genders beyond the binary, trans characters, which is something that we see in the Southwestern cultures. We have, evidence that trans folks existed and that they were part of society and that they were often revered in societies as having like a special kind of wisdom. And so I really wanted to include all of that. It just seemed natural and right. And certainly those characters are just a larger part of the story. So it was important too that their sexuality or their gender was not the entire story. That's not the
Right.
reason they're there. They're there because they're important to the larger story. They're interesting characters. They have a lot going on. And it was just natural that there would be diversity in who they were.
Well, did you learn anything from your characters? Did any of your characters give you a surprise as you wrote it?
Oh, this question is always funny to me. I'm like, no, because I'm God.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I'd have to really think about it. And I might be forgetting because, I wrote this book quite a while ago now.
Yeah.
But most of the time I'm in charge. Whatever they're learning because I'm teaching it to them, so to
Okay.
speak. So yeah, not really.
That makes sense. Well, how will your characters continue to grow as you continue to publish the series?
Oh, yeah. So the second book in the series, Fevered Star, will be out in April of 2022. And I definitely won't give anything of that away in case you haven't read Black Sun yet. But there's a lot of changes going on. There's Narampa in particular, starts Black Sun as the Sun Priest, sort of the highest calling, one of the most powerful positions in the land, but it's fairly ceremonial for her. She came from the wrong side of the tracks. She has a lot of political enemies. She's sort of just fighting for her political and literal survival. And certainly by the end of Black Sun, she is in a position that she never foresaw herself being in. And throughout Fevered Star, uh, things happen. I'll just have to leave it at that. But there's a lot of surprising, I think, character growth, alliances that maybe you didn't see coming. That's really my favorite thing is to watch a character grow in ways that are unexpected to the reader, I think. Um, I'm really looking for that emotional reaction. Like I said, I want you to be attached to those characters. I want you to care what happens to them. Uh, and then I'm going to put them through the ringer.
Well, once they're put through the ringer, what would make it a satisfying ending to you?
Oh, gosh. I think for I think for a lot of the characters to reach their potential,
Yeah.
like there are a number of characters I think who um, have taken life as it is sort of for granted, or sort of have lowered their expectations. I think someone like Shiala, who is this a disgraced sea captain with sort of siren powers and more powers than she even realizes she has. But it's sort of been lost in the haze of alcohol and promiscuity. And I am excited to see how she changes and grows, what she goes through to become sort of her fully realized self. And so that's what I think is a satisfying ending to me. I want people to sort of uh, be excited to see her grow, to see where she
Yeah.
ends up, not just her, but all the characters. Uh, and to feel good about it, hopefully. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see who survives. I'm not sure yet.
Well, I'm sure that some will die. Speaking of killing off characters, you mentioned some of the well-known high fantasy authors like Tolkien, George R. R. Martin, and others who are known for killing off beloved characters. Could you tell us who some of your writing role models are?
Oh gosh, I grew up reading a lot of fantasy at the public library. Actually, my mom was an English teacher. So it was like the sort of every Saturday she would drop my brother and I off at the library, come back in a few hours where we would have like a whole new set of books, for the week, that sort of thing. Um, and so I grew up reading, I don't know, like Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising, Lloyd Alexander's Black Cauldron. I think my first big fantasy series that really set me on this path was the Dragonlance Chronicles by Hickman and Weiss. But I was also an early Dune fan. I think I read Dune in like sixth grade. So that's a kind of a sci-fi fantasy.
Mm.
And of course, Star Wars, which I got to write in that universe. And to me, that is sort of like space opera fantasy. So I think it really mixes a lot of genres. So all of those, I have so many influences because that was just I love reading. I'm just like a really big reader. So there's no one in particular that I'm like, that's the one.
Right.
But certainly I love all of the classics and so many new authors coming out too.
Yes.
It's very exciting.
And one of the questions we had is what's a current book that stands out in your mind is excellent?
Oh, and I would recommend She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, which I absolutely loved.
Okay.
It's sort of a fantasy retelling set in Chinese history, but it's very challenging of gender norms. Wonderful characters, just characters so good. I'm like, oh, I wish I'd written them, which is like the best feeling, right?
I should put that down on my list then.
I just love spending time in their world and in their brain. Those characters are so good. I wish that I'd written them myself.
You mentioned visiting your public library on Saturdays growing up. Do you still visit your public library now? Or maybe not during a global pandemic?
Not recently with COVID, but I do have a daughter, a 13-year-old daughter. And so we spent a lot of time at the public library, especially when she was younger and just starting to read, just going through the shelves and just picking out books that look good to her and, spending time with those. So still very much a part of our lives. Getting the first library card under her name, her own card was still a very big deal. So yeah, I can't wait to get back to the library.
Good. Well, what kind of programs would you enjoy joining at your library?
Oh gosh, in my free time?
Yeah, like in between writing a TV show and a comic book and some novels.
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. I
Go
mean,
do a craft program.
oh, well, perhaps I'm the least craftiest person in the world. I'm terrible at like crafts. But I always love a good book club, or something like that. And then I always used to, love to do things with my daughter. So just to go and be around the kids and enjoy that. But yeah.
Oh, cool. Are there programs you think libraries could do for their community that wouldn't maybe fit other providers? Like, wouldn't fit your parks and recreation or um, other public services, that maybe the library is a great place for them.
Oh gosh, I was thinking about this. So I lived on the Navajo Nation for a while, and it's very rural, and the resources are very limited. And I would love to see something like a bookmobile for the Navajo Nation or for other underserved
Oh, yeah.
communities, rural communities, because I just don't think kids have exposure to the libraries. The libraries are, at least the ones that I visited, were poorly funded. It's just difficult to reach all those places. And lots of folks don't have transportation, reliable transportation. So I think really that outreach to the community to get books in kids' hands, whether it be in a rural area or, the cities or wherever it is, that, kids have lack of access. I think that would mean a lot. I think that that's very exciting.
Mm. Here in Suffolk, we have a library to go,
Oh, there you
and we
go.
try to go to locations and do pop-up libraries and things like that. We do it sometimes in school parking lots. We've been doing Friday afternoons at a snow cone stand.
Ah,
Um,
alluring.
yes. Um, but it is great to hear from outside people that that sort of resource could be expanded and reach communities that need it. Um, is there one of those audiences, those children or adults like us, that you feel more comfortable connecting with? Um,
Oh gosh. I did also write a children's novel for the Rick Riordan Presents imprint called Race to the Sun. And it was pre-COVID. It came out in January before COVID really hit. And so I got to go on a book tour. And I got to go to some of the middle grade schools on the reservation. And then also in Arizona, they were primarily Native American. And that was just a really incredible experience because a lot of those kids haven't, they never get visited. No one thinks, oh, I'm going to go to the school on the res, to talk about my book. So they haven't met a lot of authors. They certainly haven't met a lot of authors that look like them or that come from their background. And they haven't seen themselves in books a lot, particularly like in adventure books. I mean, I know we get all the native educational ones and all this, but one that's just a fun adventure where they get to be the hero. Uh, their
yeah.
eyes just really lit up. Like it was just the coolest thing. And I think more than anything, I really felt like, hey, you know what? This makes a difference. Like this is something big, and I would have, kids come up to me and be like, I'm Navajo. That's my culture in that book. That could be me. And I just thought, wow, that's cool. So I mean, I primarily write for adults and I love writing for adults. Um, but sometimes writing for the kids is particularly rewarding.
It gives you a payoff.
It
Yeah.
does. It does.
Yeah. Well, do you think it's easier to tell a story in one of the genres that you've written in than another? Is it the sort of sci-fi space opera of Star Wars or the fantasy of Black Sun, or you're doing a comic book now? Um, is there a certain way of writing that feels more natural?
No, I think my secret is that I don't write to genre. I
Yeah.
write whatever I want, and then I let the marketing people tell me what genre to put it in. Although I will say that I don't know a whole lot about like spaceships. Like it feels very technical sometimes.
Yeah.
But luckily with like space opera, it was something like a Star Wars, which is sort of like space opera fantasy. You
Yeah.
can kind of just, no one's going to hold you to the science of like how an X-Wing works. And if they do, then I'm just going to be like, sorry, that's not my.
That's
Mhm.
fine. Well, I think that that exhausts the list of questions that I had collected for you. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh, good.
Mm, I kind of want to repeat what was that the book that you recommended.
I'm going to recommend She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, which is this sort of wonderful fantasy retelling of a part of Chinese history with these rich, complicated characters that are challenging gender norms. Just wonderful stuff. Probably one of my favorites. It's on my favorites of the year list for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate your recommendation. Now, you know that we won this uh meeting with you because of Suffolk using Zubeen for a winter reading challenge.
Mhm.
Um, and so hopefully all the readers of Suffolk will watch our recording with you. And I know that we have um, hardback copies of Black Sun, and we have Star Wars Resistance Reborn and Race to the Sun in available in our library catalog, and we have the audiobooks available through our library uses the Hoopla app. So our library users have access to as much of your work as we could get our hands on.
Oh, wonderful. Thank
And
you.
it was really inspiring to hear you talk about your characters.
Oh,
And
yay.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything that you feel like people should know before we say goodnight tonight? Anything about
Um,
you or your work?
gosh, I don't know. Is there I guess, I love a good story. And I love, I feel honored that I get to create worlds for a living and create characters and share them with you all. Like, it was the most important thing to me growing up, and I think it's been the most in reading and escaping into these worlds has been the most important sort of comfort for me throughout my life and my many sort of career iterations. I've always been telling stories, and now I just get to do it professionally. So really, thank you to you, all the readers, for allowing me to do that. It means the world.